So something that I often get is, how do you do it? How do you do what you do? A lot of people find design very overwhelming. It can become a lot of moving parts that people just kind of get in the weeds about. And I'm here to help make that easier for you. So the goal with this video is to give you the tools that you need to execute a design within your space the way that the pros would do it. So I'm going to break this down for you in 8 steps, and I'm hopefully going to make this as user-friendly as possible because this is designed for the everyday decorator slash designer of their space. So the first point, and this is probably an obvious one, is to create a budget. But how do we create that budget? I think that's the part that we really need to dive into on this one. So when we think about creating a budget, we really need to think about how much can you even afford to spend on your space? We really have to break down the renovation or the decorating project or the space in your home that you're addressing with a few different areas. We need to look at your must-haves, nice-to-haves, and the things that just really aren't a priority. And I say that because those are your wish list items. So when you're thinking about these categories, I'm going to use it in the example of perhaps a washroom renovation. So some of the must-haves for your redo of your space, let's say it's a full gut, right? We're going to redo the whole thing. So the must-haves are plumbing fixtures. So think your sink and your toilet, any of the fixtures throughout the space. So you think your faucet, whatever hangs your towels, you're hanging your towels on, your shower faucet, handles, all that kind of stuff within the space. Some of your nice-to-haves might be a more expensive, floor tile or wall tile over maybe a more cost-effective one. So, you need to pick something to finish it, and there's maybe this white subway tile that looks really lovely, but there's also this kind of higher end. It'd be nicer to have that. So, what's the difference between a more cost-effective and more of the aesthetic that you're going for? So that's kind of more of a nice to have, right? Maybe we want a fancy mirror with the lighting and the kind of LED thing going on in it, but you could do something that's maybe a little bit more practical. So those are your nice to haves. Things that aren't a priority might be things like a soap dispenser or new towels or some of the decor pieces that you put throughout it. It would be great to have it, but to get the renovation done, that's a nice to have, not a must have for functionality. So that's how I would look at perhaps a space when you're thinking about your budget and how you determine where you're spending those dollars. And you also really want to create a detailed spreadsheet. Shows, what the item is, what the size is, what the cost is. And I'll even include things like square footage. So thinking about wall tiles, or thinking about floor tiles, we can include the square footage of how much you need. I always add also a little bit extra for something like tile or anything that could have some damage. So you think if you're cutting tiles and one snaps in half, well, that might be a waste because you can't use it. So you want to add a little extra percentage. Typically, I do about 10% extra to allow for waste. If you're buying from a store like Home Depot or Lowe's, you're really able to save, say, a box and return it if you don't use it. So usually it's something that you don't have to worry about too much if you have a little bit extra, or it's good just in case anything happens down the line, you have something to, fix it with. Not that tile's easy to replace or fix, but for some people, it's peace of mind knowing that they have the material if they ever need to do some type of repair. What I love about having this spreadsheet is you're doing this on the front end. So you're getting a really good visual of the type of items you want in the space, even if you don't know exactly your style or aesthetic yet, we will get to that. But just from how much is it going to cost for tile? How much is it going to cost for paint? How much is it going to cost for a toilet? So you're starting to do that homework on what kind of money, what kind of dollars you should be putting forward into your project. So once you have this filled out and you also understand, okay, I have, 200 square foot of flooring, and you find out some prices for the flooring that you're thinking about, you can actually start calculating kind of roughly how much that's going to cost you to do. Now, these are just for your materials, but it's nice to at least gauge that cost. If you're a good DIYer, then you're able to get an idea of how much it would cost with materials, the labor you're going to do yourself. If you're not a big DIY person and you're going to hire it out, you at least understand the general cost of the materials, and then you can get the quote for the labor, and you'll have a good idea of at least how much the materials will cost, and then you can factor in whatever the labor costs are provided. It'll give you a really good number to see if your budget's in line. So let's say you're budgeting $5,000 for a renovation. You're going to get a good sense if you've budgeted too low, too high, or just right by going through this process. Just a brief pause here. If you're enjoying the content of today's video, I'd really appreciate it if you would hit that like button. That would be very helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, so we've got the numbers out of the way. Very important to have your numbers in line before we get into the fun stuff. So the fun stuff is creating your inspiration board. This is where you get to go and live your Pinterest dreams and actually find the look and aesthetic that you're after. So when we're thinking about creating a inspiration board, we really want to start by visualizing the concept of the space. We want to think of what the purpose is. So let's get back to our bathroom example. So if you're thinking about a spa-like bathroom, maybe a place of relaxation, right? Or perhaps you want something funky and fun and fresh, and maybe you want to do something a little bit more wild with your color palette. Or perhaps you want to go with something more like a particular style. More glam, maybe you want to go more boho, perhaps you want to go more modern, or perhaps, something completely unique to you. So you really want to think about how the space will look and feel. Sometimes that can be the hardest part, but I do find that you will notice a theme as you are starting to pull these inspirational images and building your inspiration board. You will tend to gravitate naturally to certain styles because you already tend to like them more. So instead of just picking something because you've seen it on a show, really go, what do I like about these looks that I'm drawn to? I would almost start very like blank canvas and just grab anything that catches your attention and then start filtering it down and being like, what is it that I like from each of these? What are the similarities and what are the differences? And then think about the ambiance in those type of imagery that you found. What do they feel like? What kind of moment does it give? Does it give spa? Does it give modern? Does it give funky? Does it give, eclectic? You'll start to see a theme as you pull different things that you gravitate towards and that you really like. Generally, there will be some consistency throughout these items that you pick. So when you're looking at these, you also really want to start exploring the style and the colors that you see throughout these imageries. So, if you're thinking of different rooms, look at the color schemes that you're drawn to. Think about the furniture and the accessories. That's one of the great parts of just looking for inspirational images and picking the ones that really speak to you, is that you can start pulling and dissecting them. So say you're doing a living room. You may notice that there's several living rooms that have a very similar sofa look to them in all of your inspiration. So that's how you really start drilling down with these inspirational images to really start honing into what is my style. So this is the first phase of our inspiration board, which is just grabbing everything that speaks to you. Now we want to take that and we want to refine it down. So we want to start looking, as I've said, by analyzing and refining and finding commonalities and really just taking those and then refining it down into a more cohesive look. So you want to try to take the big board and kind of create a more tailored board for the space that you're doing, whether it's a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, etc. So then really tailor it down and find the ones that speak to you the most, but that you've also analyzed. So you're finding the color themes, you're finding the style, the furniture, the accessories, the ambiance that really flow together. And they will start to depict a clear image as you start refining and editing your inspiration board. So you've gone through, you've looked at the pictures, you've refined, you've edited, and now you have your inspiration for your space. So we've created our budget and we have some inspirations on what the look and feel of the space is going to be. Now we really need to start doing the work. Not that it's not been fun and some work, but this part is really important. And that is to start measuring your space and developing a layout. Now, don't run away from me. You don't have to do fancy CAD drawings to get a layout of your space. What's great is there's a lot of free tools you can use, or you could just use a notepad, just using square graph paper, or if you have a tablet that has a graph paper option on the iPad, you can use either one of those to really just create a very simple floor plan. I did do a video on this, I'm going to say a little while ago. I will link it for you guys where it shows how to measure and lay out a space. That tool will really help you, whether you're doing it by hand, you're doing it on like a tablet, and just to give you idea of clearances around furniture. You do not need to draw things in super particular. Square blocks are perfectly fine. So this is just to get you an idea how much space you have, and where things fit. Now, if you do want to get a little bit more technical or a little bit more creative, I do believe IKEA on their website has like a room planner. You could probably utilize that as well if you would like. And then I believe that there are some other like SketchUp you could use for free, a trial period. So if you're tech savvy, you could look at using some of those free software items to really help build out your space as well. So there's a few options for you that are kind of go above and beyond doing it manually. But don't feel you need to do anything overly complicated when you're measuring and laying out your space. It really is a pretty simple exercise for the most part. Now, some people just don't get plans, and I get it. That is not a problem at all. Another step that you can do is taking some tape and masking out general sizing and location of where certain things are going. A great space, to think about is perhaps the living room, because a lot of that is freestanding furniture. A lot of times when you go into these like big box stores and you're looking at furniture pieces, because the store is so big, they seem a lot smaller than they seem a lot smaller than they would be in your space, when in reality, they're really massive. So being able to map out some ideas of what sizing works in your space, even before you've selected your final piece, is really important. It will give you a really good guideline of what will fit and what won't fit in your space. And the worst thing is to buy an expensive piece of furniture that really just doesn't fit in the space. That is terrible. And if you're wondering, well, how do I know the size of a sofa, or how do I know the size of a chair? There are a lot of standards around those sizes, but if there's something that you like that you've done on your budgeting or just in your inspiration boards, check out their websites and they'll usually have some dimensions on there. So you can use those dimensions to actually help map out the size in your space. And perhaps you want about a 6-foot or an 8-foot sofa, then you look for a sofa within the style that you like that fits that size. So you can kind of reverse it, whether you have a sofa in mind to see what the sizing is, if it works, or you can have a size of this is my max size and then find a sofa that kind of fits your style in around that size and then see where it lays out. So you can kind of look at it from both ends. But one of the good things is you can generally find all of the dimensions right on the furniture website. So here's a really big tidbit to make your space look like it's well designed versus like it's been just picked out of a catalog. And there is a big difference, and that's diversifying your selections. I feel like we went through a phase where everything was really matchy-matchy, or, you go to Leon's and you buy the full matching set, or the Brick, or the Bay, or Crate and Barrel, or wherever, Pottery Barn. You could basically name any big department store that sells furniture, and when you end up buying a full complementary set, it just looks not designed. It's the complete opposite of a design space. So when we tend to go in and buy a whole suite of something, we really end up with a very flat looking design. It doesn't have that layered look that most designers will bring into a space. And oftentimes they do this through mixing different pieces from different brands and also complementary styles, but different styles. So you really want to think about blending your different styles with your preferred aesthetic to really create that layered and dynamic space. So how this really works as you're building your space is you're unifying with those common elements. So looking for shared features like the color, the texture, and the form across different styles to bring harmony to the design. You really want to introduce those pieces from complementary styles or periods that will add depth and interest into the space. This is really what's going to help create a space that looks well designed versus just picked out of a Pottery Barn catalog. Another great trick that you'll notice with a lot of well-designed spaces is that there'll be something to ground the space. So bringing in some darker hues, darker accents, perhaps some black accents throughout the space will really add that touch of drama and just really enhance that overall look and feel of the design itself. So we don't want to forget some of the key elements like where's the TV going and where are your plugs going to be for something like an accessory lamp that you're putting in the space, or lighting throughout the space, depending on how involved the decorating or renovation is. So you don't want to forget to think about where are those, if they're existing and you're just decorating, or if you're doing a bigger renovation, where you want to place them. The fun part with a big renovation is you can really develop a layout and then place the outlets as per the layout. If you have a certain spot that you want a lamp to sit, for example, you can place an outlet there, or you can place a switch at a proper location. If you're just doing a decorating project, think about where they are on the front end so that when you're laying out your furniture, you're aware of where cords and cables are going to go and where the TV is going to go and plug in, etc. That's really key, because if you set up a layout and then you realize you have to run wires that you haven't really budgeted for, that could be costly to get an electrician in to do that. So definitely think about the placement of your outlets when you are designing your layout. So the next step in our process is we have this layout, we have a general idea of size of the pieces that we want to bring into the space. So now we really need to assess our foundation items. So those are your key items, like a sofa, a side table, a chair, a bathtub, a toilet, a sink, etc. When we're thinking about those, we're also wanting to think about, are they new or are they existing? If we're working with existing pieces, we want to make sure that whatever type of design that we're doing in the space works for those items that we're already working with. If we're adding new in, we need to determine what items we want. We have the sizing, so now we actually get to go out and look at what pieces we're going to bring in for our foundational pieces. I feel like some people will probably hate this advice, but it's great advice if you do find your style changes over time. And that's for thinking about foundational pieces with more of a timeless approach. So thinking of more of a neutral color palette and something that's a little bit softer that will last the test of time is a really good thought process to have when you're building your space, no matter what your style is. I find when we think of those foundational pieces as more of a neutral and simple palette, then we're able to integrate and change our style over time through accessories and different items that we can bring in and build on them. That's why we call them the foundation pieces. So another thing we want to think about with our foundation pieces is its durability. You know, a sofa can be a pretty big investment depending on, what you're buying. So think about your lifestyle. If you have kids, do you have pets? Do you entertain a lot? Perhaps going with a leather product might be good. Perhaps doing something that's more of a durable and very easy to clean fabric is good. Maybe you need to get Scotchgard on it. You never know. There's lots of ways that different people live, and you want to think about that when you're thinking about the selection for those foundation pieces as well. So now we've built our foundation pieces and we've decided what items we're keeping and which ones we're bringing in that are new. Based on our inspiration board as our guide for all of these decisions, the next thing we want to look at is what colors are we painting the walls? You're probably going to notice a theme throughout your inspiration boards that have a typical color palette running through it, and that's what you're going to use as your guideline for selecting your colors. So based on your inspiration boards and your style preferences, start thinking about those undertones. Do you want to have a cool space or maybe more of a warm space? Do you want more of a neutral base, or maybe you want to do an accent wall or add in some wallpaper? You really want to use that inspiration board to help drive the decision on those paint selections. Now, one of the great things with painting a space is that paint is relatively inexpensive, although a huge pain in the bum to do yourself, but it is relatively inexpensive from a design change aspect. Over time, it's a lot cheaper to repaint your space than replace all your furniture. That being said, thinking about what you want that to look like and what you want that to feel like based on those inspiration images that you've already pre-selected. Another thing to consider is if you're going to do wall treatments. If you're going to add something in like wallpaper, that can be a big undertaking for a DIY project. So really researching the type of wallpaper that you want to bring in, the durability, how it goes up, if you want to hire somebody to do that, and factoring that cost. One of the things I love with paint is that you can buy little tester pots. They're just these little tiny $5 pots. And it's great because if you're already painting the space, you can slap it on and just see it on the walls. Why this is so important is that paint tends to change the way it looks depending on the lighting within your space. So something that might have looked like a certain way inside the store looks completely different in your space. And it's really important to do a tester sample on your wall before you paint it. Trust me. If you have cooler lights, if you have a lot of natural light, if you have warm light, it's going to change the look, especially if you're using something with a certain undertone. It may bring out a color that's more pink than you wanted, more gray than you wanted, more beige than you wanted. So you really need to see that color on the wall, in your space, in your lighting. So that's a really, really key point. Something that we do in commercial design often is drawdowns, which is where we actually see the paint sample before we give it the green light. So this is very typical in design practice. A little tidbit if you're trying to pick a color for your space and you're just really having a hard time doing that. Let's say you know you want to do a cream color. You can go through Pinterest or Google Images or even a Benjamin Moore design brochure. They usually have like a nice color palette that works together. If you're really not sure which shade of a certain color to do, but you know the general idea of the color, look to see what other designers have recommended in a similar family. I know that oftentimes when we're looking for inspiration, you'll find nicely curated palettes that work together. You don't have to reinvent the wheel when you're selecting colors. You can use those, designer guides, those Benjamin Moore pamphlets to really help pick the right shade for you. And it shows like how it works with other colors. So don't feel like you need to go and look through hundreds of thousands of paint colors to try to find the perfect one. If that seems really overwhelming to you, Google, Pinterest, and even those little brochures that you can find in the paint store is a really great way to find the perfect shade of whatever color area you're looking in. Now you can see how your space is coming together. Now we get to start adding in more of those personal touches. So we want to think about accessories. So when we're thinking about accessories and placement, we have this typical rule that we use, and you do not have to follow it. But a lot of times you'll see, and maybe now that I'm telling you, you'll notice it more, the rule of 3. That is something that a lot of designers do in a space because it's just aesthetically pleasing to have an odd number of things, whether it's on a shelf or on a console table, etc. You'll often see that as kind of the standard for how accessories are placed. But you also want to think about scale and proportion. Now, if you're having trouble with how to figure out what scale and proportion is within your space, I did do a video. It's a pretty old video, so apologize if the editing's not great on it, but it is about the 6 principles of design, and I have a whole section in there on scale and proportion. So you want to really think about that when you're pulling together your accessories for your space. A lot of times we'll say, choose larger, more impactful pieces over smaller and more numerous little pieces to avoid like a very cluttered look. However, if you're really into the maximalist style, you might want a lot more pieces. So it also depends on your aesthetic. This is just kind of a general rule of thumb. Don't take it like literally have to do it this way. It really is a personal touch. So when you're thinking about the pieces that you bring in, if we're thinking about that scale up approach and maybe bringing in some bigger pieces throughout the space, whether it's a big mirror or artwork, an oversized lighting feature, etc. So when you're bringing in some of these key pieces is that they become a beautiful central focal point and really a highlight of the space. And it really does add that designer touch when it's really something that's impactful and really adds a lot to the space. So when you're thinking about decorating your space, think about bringing in things that can house smaller items like containers or a decorative tray. You really want to create visual coherence throughout the space so that things work together and flow while also creating different size, scale, and proportion of the items throughout the space. Now here is a part that is super key, and I feel like it comes up a lot in the trends video. When people make comments on, I don't go with trends, I don't want to do the trend, I don't want to follow a trend. I get it. We want our own look and feel. Every space should tell a story of you. And that's the best part about pulling together a space. Even if you love a trend, this is the tip that makes it feel well designed. And that's incorporating items that tell your story and really fit with your style. So express yourself with smaller pieces, think accessories and accent tables, lamps, pillows, plants, and other small items that really offer a lot more freedom of creative expression. You really want to think about experimenting, maybe mixing some old and new items, maybe bringing in some different items that have a lot of history to you and your family from travels or, different adventures that you've been on. Don't be afraid to experiment with different pieces within your space. You can always take them out if it doesn't work. I think one of the ways to really help make your space feel more like you is to also incorporate some items that have a unique and personal touch. So let's say you're really into photography. Perhaps you have some really cool vintage cameras. Displaying those would look really, really interesting in your space and offer a story of who you are. Perhaps you're really interested in plants. I love plants. You may want to incorporate a lot more plants and planters and beautiful arrangements with your different types of plants throughout your space. That again speaks to you on more of a personal level. Perhaps you're a big collector of books. You may want to bring in some way to display beautiful books that you have, whether they're, historical books or just a collection of books that you've enjoyed reading. So think about ways to really bring in your personality throughout the decor of your space. And the biggest tip through all of these tips is to enjoy the process. Design and decorating doesn't have to be super serious. It is a lot of fun to pull together a space. I'm really hoping that the tips in this video help you get through that process easier and more successfully, and really help you bring together a space that you just love to live in. Okay, if you enjoyed today's video, I highly recommend you jump over to my kitchen trends video. It's just been a really popular one. I think it's lots of inspiration if you're into kitchens. I'll also link one of my maximalist videos. That's also been one that people have really enjoyed and have lots of inspirations for your next decorating project. All right, until next time, bye.